Hey everybody, Ketwolski here, checking in with another one of our hashtag Star Trek Picard discussion review episodes. So today, of course, we're going to be reviewing the Star Trek Picard Season 1 finale. Okay, so my feelings on this episode have kind of gone through a bit of a whirlwind in a lot of ways. My initial reaction was actually very negative, but after rewatching it several more times and spending some time to kind of analyze the different elements of the actual episode, I realized that a lot of my focus of negativity was actually on one specific scene, and that was actually the whole situation with the Sutra Confrontation and what was going on with trying to throw the thermal detonator at the antenna and all that stuff like that. My main hatred focus is kind of on that sequence, but we'll kind of get into that when I talk about the things that I disliked about this episode. That's going to kind of take up the majority of that. It's actually going to be a completely different breakdown for me to do that just one sequence, because I felt like the way that was put together, it was poorly written and very poorly edited, kind of just weighed the entire episode down overall. But beyond that, I would say that this episode kind of got a solid 7.5 out of 10 for me. Again, we do have some issues that I have with it, but overall there were some very, very fantastic sequences. All the actors did a great job in this episode. I thought overall the entire storyline was pretty well done, but there were a lot of head-scratching moments. So like we always do with these review videos, we're going to talk about things that I liked first, then we'll get into the things that I disliked, and now there's no more theories, but I'm going to share some of my initial thoughts of the season overall before we kind of get into my full season review videos that I'll be doing later on. Okay, so the first thing that I really enjoyed was obviously this sequence here between Picard and Soji. I actually wish that there was a bit more to these kinds of discussions where it was a bit more of a philosophical debate about what was going on, and we kind of got that later on towards the end, but they weren't in, close proximity to each other. It was through the view screen and stuff like that, but that's okay. I like the fact that they touched on it, on a physical aspect here at the beginning, and then we continue to carry it on towards the end. So I did like that, so that was some really good stuff there. Very Star Trek of them. So a couple of things that occurred in this episode was actually some really great subversion of expectations. I think that a lot of people were expecting one to be a huge space battle, expecting this, creature coming out from on high to be this, be-all, end-all, and bad guy enemy type situation. But what I liked is the fact that they kind of flipped a couple of things on their heads. And it started off pretty early with the flipping, which is that Nerissa, turns out, has been on the Borg cube this whole time, which is not something that we originally thought. We saw her, I think, back in episode 8, where she gets beamed away from the XBs kind of like attacking her or whatever, and the implication is that she got beamed into the Romulan fleet and then she left with all of them, but actually she just beamed to somewhere else inside of the cube, which I did like. Now I know that Seven had a line in that episode that she said that there were no Romulans left on the cube, but she's Zhat Vash, she's Tal Shiar, she could easily hide from the internal sensors. It doesn't surprise me that she was able to do that, so I like how they subverted the expectation of where Nerissa was a little bit. I thought that was kind of cool. Another thing that I really enjoyed was this sequence here where, Raffi and Rios are kind of having a bit of a banter. It was kind of a fun little back and forth as they try to figure out how to use this magical MacGuffin device, which they still have at the end of this episode. So I assume that's going to come up a lot later on in seasons 2 or 3 or 4 or however many more seasons we get. I'm sure this device is going to be used to do all sorts of fun little things. So I really liked it. I like how it's kind of like magic in some ways, and I do like the fact that we have that now within Star Trek. I know a lot of people are saying, well, it's too fancy, it's too much, it can just do anything. And it's like, yeah, but at the same time, though, it allows for a kind of a fun mystery device where it constantly surprises the audience members and the crew of the actual characters of the La Sirena. So I like it. I thought it was kind of cool. So something that I was really surprised about, obviously we knew that Agnes was going to betray Dr. Soong and the androids and kind of still help out the crew that she's gotten to know so well over the course of the season. But I liked how they kind of tied it back into what she had been doing the majority of the season, which is lying to people and acting as a double agent. And I like how that kind of paid off in a lot of ways. It was an interesting take, and I wasn't quite clear on how they were going to execute her betrayal of the Soong, android family that was living at the station or whatever. But I like how they tied it back into her double agenting and stuff like that. It kind of added like a little extra payoff to what she had done and kind of used the skill sets that she was forced into learning by Commodore O for something much more positive. So I thought that was really well done, very well executed. Of course, another great thing about this episode was that we got to see Picard back in the pilot's chair, the captain's chair, so to speak, and he was flying around La Serena, and that was just fun. I really enjoyed it. I got the joke earlier on in the season where he was like, I actually don't know how to fly this thing because it's all holographic and it's very different, but I like how they paid that off later on now where he did learn how to use it by watching Rios, and it just kind of shows off how skilled of a pilot Picard still is, and I like the fact that they had him piloting it. Of course, they could have just had Rios doing it or the whole crew on the ship, but the fact that he was in the chair and doing it all himself, I like that. I thought it was kind of cool. It really kind of showed that he was taking charge and taking ownership of the final act of this season, which is to try to save the synthetics and all of organic life inside of all the quadrants. So very, very cool. I liked it quite a bit. Another sequence that I really enjoyed, which I'm not sure how other people are going to react, is the fight sequence between Nerissa and Seven of Nine. I like how she was able to exact that revenge for Hugh's death by kicking her down, off the catwalks into oblivion. Now, I'm not sure if Nerissa's dead. I'm assuming that she is, but she has faked us out before, and she's Zat Vastal Shiar, so she could have done something that maybe, left her alive. There was no body. Therefore, we don't know for sure that she's dead. But I did like the fight sequence there. It was really cool. I thought it was decently choreographed, even though, obviously Nerissa was going to grab Seven's gun, and it was kind of, obvious. And I felt like it was weird that Seven would allow someone to do that to her because she's such a skilled hand-to-hand combat fighter. But it is what it is, such is life. But I did like that sequence. I mean, I'm not sure I even need to describe how awesome this was. This was one of the many theories that were kind of going on. We thought maybe it was going to be LaForge showing up, if it was going to be Worf showing up, if it was going to be Riker showing up, and obviously we got Riker back in his captain's uniform on board an amazingly shot sequence where I think he's actually on the Discovery Bridge. I think they redid the Discovery Bridge. I think he's sitting in the Discovery's captain's chair, but they did a really great job of redressing that set and kind of moving panels around and stuff like that, and they did a good job of trying to make it seem very, very realistic that it was a different style bridge, so kudos there. And of course, it was just awesome to see him back in that amazing uniform. It looks great on him, and I wish we would see more of that in the next follow-on seasons, but I don't know if we'll get that, but this was a really great sequence. Speaking of the sequences with Riker and kind of the whole stuff kind of happening above the planet, obviously we had this amazingly massive Starfleet ship, we obviously had this amazingly massive Starfleet, fleet show up to combat the Romulans and kind of scare them back down. I loved it. The ship design looked very Pathfinder-ish from Star Trek Online in a good way. It wasn't quite the Odyssey style that we were all kind of expecting, but it was cool to see a new style ship kind of presented there. Now, I know a lot of people, especially the Starship fanatics, are going to be upset because they just copied and pasted it like 200 times. I get that. To me, it wasn't that big of a deal, but I do sympathize that other people focus on that aspect, from different perspectives. So I didn't have an issue with it. I just liked seeing all the ships there. So one of my plot theories, and I think a lot of people had the same idea, is that Picard was going to go into the golem body, but we of course had to kill him first and have that whole sequence there, and all of that was really well done. I specifically liked the part where he beams down to the planet, and he kind of shares like a moment with everybody and kind of passes away. Very, very well acted by everybody involved, and of course by Sir Patrick. Now I know a lot of people are going to be upset saying, well, why didn't he talk to Riker and tell Riker that he was about to die? Why did he do that? It makes it kind of different ways to think about it. And I think it's a very personal choice for Picard to sit there and say, well, I don't want one of my best friends, if not his only best friend, to watch him die from this illness horrifically, in his arms. He wanted him to leave with a high note of a positive memory for him. I think that it was a personal choice by Picard. I don't know if I would have made that choice, but it was what he decided to do. I don't think it was necessarily a plot hole. It was just something that the character himself decided that it was necessary to let Riker leave and not necessarily deal with more death, because they've dealt with a lot of death, in the Riker family, with Thad and all that stuff like that. So I think it was just a personal choice, but the sequence itself was really well done. Kind of piggybacking off of Picard's final death sequence was these mourning shots that we had. The Rios and Seven one kind of stood out to me as kind of one of the better ones, but we obviously had different characters kind of mourning the passing of Picard, and I liked it. I thought it was really well done, very, very emotional. Really smart to kind of include all these sequences, but it was a bit of a misdirection because obviously we as the audience know that they're sticking him in the golem, and I assume that all of them knew that because they would have probably mentioned that to them. So it was kind of weird, but at the same time, though, it was good, if that makes sense. I don't know, but I liked it, but it was also kind of like, all right, well, they should know that they're trying to save him, but of course they didn't necessarily know if it was going to work, so maybe they were still very, very nervous about it actually working out or not, and they were still dealing with it. So very well done overall, I thought, from all the actors and the writers and editors for this sequence. Of course, probably the best sequence of this episode, and probably the best sequence of the entire series, maybe only matched by the other Data Picard sequence in episode 1, is this sequence here, where they're having this kind of discussion in this weird quantum reality simulation where Data's mind is existing, and we pick up Data where he left off right after he copied his mind into B4. So he doesn't remember the rest of the events from Star Trek Nemesis. It only kind of picks up right after he finishes that copy over, and we have a great, fantastic conversation between Picard and Data. This is probably my favorite, if not second favorite sequence in the entire series up to this point. It was so well acted, so well shot. I loved the idea of this blacked out version of the Picard den, that's where they're meeting, and that's, it's kind of like this pseudo hologramish type situation. I know it's a lot of space fantasy, science fiction terms being thrown around. It's like, well, how does this work? What's going on with this? What's going on with that? And it's a bit of techno-babble, which Star Trek has. Star Trek's got a lot of techno-babble, so it didn't bother me. I was just kind of captivated with the interaction between these two iconic characters. I loved it very much. Again, so well done. I really, really enjoyed it. And kind of piggybacking off of that sequence where Picard gets woken up in the Golem body, he then fulfills his final task, which was the request by Commander Data, which was to kind of end his life, so to speak. And we're going to get into my issues with that stuff here at the end. But I did love the sequence with, Data sitting in the chair, drinking his whiskey or his wine or whatever it was he was drinking. He had his cool smoking jacket on, very Data-esque. We've seen him wear those kinds of things in TNG, so I liked it quite a bit. And I really liked the sequence here where he kind of ages into an older man and then passes. It definitely felt like a very somber moment, and it was definitely kind of a proper end to the character after we saw his actual physical demise inside of Star Trek Nemesis. This sequence here kind of felt like the proper way to send off his character into the abyss, into the unknown, so to speak, and I liked it quite a bit. I thought it was really, really well done. Okay, so now let's get into the things that I disliked about this episode. And like I said, the whole Sutra Confrontation is going to be kind of pulled out and made separate because that's going to take a lot of time to talk about and kind of explain what my primary issues were there. But let's talk about some of the more minor issues that I had. So in this sequence here, it turns out that Agnes kind of knew that Dr. Soong existed because she mentions that Maddox always talked about his ability to decrypt things and stuff like that. Now, you could take this sequence in one of two ways. Either one, that Agnes knew and hid it from everybody, which she's apparently a freaking professional at, or that she was just trying to placate his, ego and kind of flatter him in a way, and he was a bit distracted, so he didn't quite realize that she was playing him. I think it's much more the former. I don't think it's the latter, because if it was the latter, the proper thing to do inside of this particular storytelling element is to have a sequence where Soong realizes that Jurati is actually, kind of jerking around with him and making a joke about him, and then coming back and realizing that she stole, the other eye to access the room and stuff like that. They never had any of those sequences. All we have here is Soong getting flattered and walking out, and the next time we see him, he's finished up his golem body, and then he realizes what's happening, and with the memories and how the android actually got killed in the previous episode. So I think Agnes was actually just lying to everybody about that and kind of withholding it, which is a bit frustrating that we don't really deal with that at all, but yeah, it is what it is. Speaking of that moment there where we see Dr. Soong again, he sees the memories of how the other android died, and again, I'm a little perplexed because it does seem as though the only thing that killed her was that brooch to the eye, which seems like a very strange thing to take down an android. And obviously, I don't know anything about how these androids were built. They're not necessarily the same as Data. We've seen Data, kind of have different superpowers at different moments. Sometimes arrows pierce his body, and other times he gets shot with a machine gun and he's totally fine. So I get that it's definitely something that's been set up before where it's not quite clear as to how strong or powerful and vulnerable they are. But it did seem like a weird thing. I was kind of hoping for a little bit more, that maybe she reached behind and did something, or maybe that she, Sutra did something else to her, but it does look as though that the only thing that took her down was the brooch to the eye. Another thing that was a bit strange for me was the whole setup that the Borg cube had the ability to shoot down La Sirena. They established this with Nerissa. She had targeted La Sirena and she was going to shoot it down. Now, after Seven, defeats her in the fight and kicks her off the catwalk, she just disables the Borg weapons. And it was very strange because there's still, at that point, this massive Romulan fleet above the planet, and she does nothing to kind of assist with that. Why doesn't she activate the weapons in order to start shooting things from the planet surface to try to get into the fight and try to help out? It was very, very bizarre. They just kind of ended that whole thing and then kind of moved on. I would say that for me, it almost felt like they forgot what to do with Nerissa in a lot of ways. It almost felt like they filmed this whole tag-on sequence with her versus Seven, and they didn't quite know what to do with her or what she would have been doing on the cube, so they just threw in this plot element where she was going to shoot it down, and then she has this fight sequence with Seven, and then it just kind of ends. It was very strange for me, because again, we saw her beam away, which again, I like the fact that it was a bit of a subversion of the expectation there, but they didn't seem to know what to do with her exactly, so they had this other plot where she was going to shoot the ship down, but then they didn't do anything with that either, so I don't know, it was just kind of strange. Another thing that really kind of irked me is that there was no resolution to the situation with Agnes murdering Bruce Maddox in cold blood. They never really bring it up. They never talk about how she was pardoned or that they decided that, Federation kind of investigated it and they said, oh, you're good to go because you were under the influence of a Romulan spy within Starfleet or you were being blackmailed into it or whatever it was. They never talk about it. She's just on the ship at the end, and they never talk about it ever again. And it was kind of a bit of a frustrating moment for me because they had all that kind of build-up, I think, and I think it was in episode 8, where they were like, you're going to turn yourself into the authorities, and this is what's going to happen, and yada, yada, yada. But after she helped Picard, it just seemed like, all is forgiven. It's all good. Don't worry about it. Just hang out here and kiss your boyfriend on the bridge, and it's all fine. Don't stress about it. And it was just kind of like, all right, well, it just felt like they just wanted to rush through that piece and kind of let us forget that she had murdered Bruce Maddox, but she let him die pretty horrifically, and one good deed does not, erase your past issues and the things that you've done, and I don't know what kind of lesson that we're supposed to take away from that. It was very bizarre for me, and it was kind of a letdown. Something else that was not really clear in this episode, and maybe we'll get more of this in the second season, but I really highly doubt it because I think they're trying to move on from the Data situation, which is, what the hell was going on with Data? It looked like his mind had been completely reconstructed and was on those giant thumbsticks that were attached to that little computer. And it's unclear if was his mind supposed to go into the golem? Was Dr. Soong supposed to go into the golem? Why did Data not get put into another body if they'd completely reconstructed his mind? It was very bizarre what they were trying to do there. It's not quite clear what the heck was going on. Was his mind completely repaired and he was fully cognizant of what was going on? It seemed to be because he knew about Soji, he knew about the synthetics, he knew what was going on with Picard, so it seemed as though he was completely aware of what was going on in his surroundings, or maybe he got that from when they inputted Picard's mind into his Matrix thing, and I'm not quite sure what they were trying to do here or what they were trying to get at, but it was very strange that they just left Data's mind on this tiny little computer and then they just turned it off. And it was a very emotional moment, it was very powerful, but it needed a little bit more explanation for us to understand why his death had to occur. I mean, I get it, he wants to be more human, and what's more human than actually dying, and I get all that, but they needed to explain a little bit more about why he wasn't able to just leave that computer and go into another body. And I know some of you guys may have some, debating points about that. I'm glad to get into that with you guys, but for me, it was a little frustrating and a little confusing. So now we need to get into two of the other kind of issues that I had here, and this involves several different sequences, and this kind of relates back to the writing and the editing overall. So the first one that I have an issue with is Commodore, or General O, as she's referring to herself now, even though they called her Commodore in the other episode, but the Commodore O situation, she has this very serious trope, and it's a very common trope inside of these science fiction style shows where they do the whole prepare to fire thing, but she does it to the point where it's really irritating.
Sterilize the entire planet. All ships, target the abomination's nest. Ready planetary sterilization pattern number 5. Resume sterilization targeting pattern on my command.
So as you see, she does it too much, and it's clearly played for drama, but at the same time, though, just one of these 200 Romulan warbirds could fire a single disruptor blast at that one tiny little station and blow it up. It would be completely destroyed. It was very bizarre that she kept just saying, power up and do this, and then repositioning every single fleet. Even when the Starfleet showed up, she could have easily sent a few ships down and then engaged the fleet so that she could still complete her task, and yet she does not do that. It was also weird that the flowers, which move incredibly slow, they sat there and waited for the flowers to get into close combat range and start destroying some of their ships before they started firing at them, when in reality they could have shot the flowers and the building all at once. You have 200 ships, and it's just mind-boggling that it went down this way. And this is the issue where they wanted to make it seem like this was a desperate fight by having so many Romulan ships, but when they put them into the actual context of the fight, they only used it as if there was only a single ship, that we were all like one entity moving around. And it was very, very bizarre, and it was very noticeably badly written and badly edited to try to pad out the runtime and try to make certain things kind of work in certain areas by having Commodore O just essentially be kind of an idiot when it comes to managing this fleet. So another issue that I had in terms of the way things were shot and edited and kind of put together was, again, kind of, utilized for the plot convenience and trying to just make sure things fell right into place exactly the way they were supposed to. Very similar to that of the situation with Commodore O. Another one that stood out to me was the situation with Narek explaining to Rios, Raffi, and Elnor what they had to do in order to destroy this antenna. And they did this in a very weird way. They go from this conference room meeting where, basically that Narek is explaining what is going on to the three of them and what needs to happen. And then they cut to this weird campfire sequence, and then he's continuing to explain the whole situation with Seb Chenem. But what's frustrating is we already had that conversation back in episode 8, where everyone uncovered the fact that the Conclave of 8, who Commodore O was, what the plan was. They want to wipe out all the synthetics because the synthetics are going to destroy all the, organic life in the galaxy. We already had this conversation, so there was no new information added to the team in order to make their decision and kind of prompt them to get engaged. In fact, they're wasting a lot of time here because the intention here is to try to ensure that their whole day goes by, because then we cut back to the exact same conference room, or excuse me, I think they're actually inside of the kind of main kitchenette area there, but it's essentially the same space where they're reviewing what the bombs are going to do and how they're going to go about doing that. And it was just rather bizarre to me that they put that in there. It almost felt like they added in that campfire sequence later on so that they could try to make it seem like a day had gone by, but there's a big issue with that because the edits later on don't match up with that, and they wanted to kind of stretch that out a little bit, but it was very, very bizarrely done because once the crew arrives at the compound to try to blow it up, the actual antenna is in the exact same position in terms of it being built as we saw at the earlier part of the episode with all the space nanobots or whatever it is that's building it. So no time had passed there, but yet an entire night had passed at this campfire sequence, which felt kind of shoved into it, and it was completely unnecessary, and it was only there to try to extend out and make sure everything landed exactly where it needed to be, because if they had just left as soon as Narek arrived and Elnor arrived, then it wouldn't have matched up with the time period where Picard and Agnes needed to evacuate from the station and arrive back at the La Serena. They kind of ran right past each other essentially, but it wouldn't have worked if they had done it immediately. So they had to make it seem as though the entire thing took place over a couple of hours, which was very noticeably poorly done. And I don't think it was originally intended to be that way, but it was very much something that stood out to me as this. They shoved this sequence in there with the campfire to try to make sure that everything else in the episode kind of fit into place. And it almost felt like they had finished the editing and realized, oh, snap, this isn't going to work the way that we thought it is, so we have to put this piece in there, and then it can kind of figure itself out. But it was very obviously and very noticeable to me. Okay, so now we need to talk about the Sutra Confrontation, and if the Commodore O situation and the campfire sequence kind of alluded a little bit to padding things out so that everything fits right into place, those were kind of like low-level versions of that. This whole Sutra Confrontation thing is like that jacked up to 1,000, and most of my frustration with this episode is directed towards the way that this sequence plays out. Everything about this is horrifically written and really, really poorly edited and just mind-bogglingly weird and strange about how everything kind of works. So right off the bat, the thing that comes off as strange is Dr. Soong pulls Sutra aside after she does kind of a pseudo, her, big old rousing speech to the other, synthetic life forms that are present at this ceremony or whatever it is. And he just deactivates her. He just deactivates her, and she just falls to the ground, and we never see Sutra ever again. And in fact, once he deactivates her, we never see Dr. Soong again until the end of the episode where he's hanging out with Golem Picard. And there is so many things he could be doing in this sequence. He could be telling Soji that Sutra betrayed them. He could be telling the rest of the synthetics that Sutra betrayed them. He could be deactivating all of the other synthetics there with this little, zap device so that the, motley crew has an opportunity to get in there and try to talk to Soji and talk her down so that she still has the opportunity to make her choice. It's all very, very bizarre. He just stays behind this pillar and we don't see him at all for the rest of the episode until all the way at the end, which is very, very weird. So the whole situation with Dr. Soong is one thing, and I kind of get that. Okay, we'll kind of put that over here to the side a little bit, but then things really go off the rails. So Rios attempts to throw the thermal detonator at the little panel thing that Soji's doing something on. We don't even know what the heck she's doing. She's doing something with it, and she immediately catches it and throws it away and discards it. Now, at this moment here, which is at 25 minutes and 9 seconds, this is the last time we see Rios, Raffi, Elnor at all for the rest of the episode until Picard beams down. And this is also the last time we see Narek, period, point blank. We have no idea what happens to Narek or that whole resolution of his character. They just pick him up and they drag him away, and we never ever go back to him whatsoever. Very strange. But the reason I have an issue with this is the remaining of the piece of this episode until Picard beams down to the planet, which is a whole long time away in terms of storytelling and in terms of a television show. They only focus on Soji working on the panel. So this is what's really weird. So at 25 minutes and 9 seconds, this is the last time we see everybody there. Then, at 28 minutes and 59 seconds, we return to Soji and she's working on the panel and she has a conversation with Picard. At this moment, she's still operating under the assumption that Narek killed the other android and that, organics are bad and everything is horrific. Keep in mind, Dr. Soong already knows the truth about what happened. He's not engaging her whatsoever. He's just standing behind that pillar. And all of our other heroes are just standing around watching her, not able to do anything. They're just standing there. Then we jump to 34 minutes and 33 seconds, and everyone is still just standing around. This whole entire situation. She's activated the beacon. Nobody knows what's going to happen. This is a very high-stakes situation. It's very, very serious. The fleet's about to bomb them and attack the Federation. All of these things are about to occur, and our main characters, are doing literally nothing. They're just standing there, doing nothing. Dr. Soong, in this moment, is also standing there, not saying anything. Soji is completely oblivious to the fact that Sutra has been disabled. She doesn't even bother to ask why Dr. Soong did that. It just happens, and she's just focused on the terminal. The problem is that they're attempting to try to edit this sequence together in order to distract the audience from the fact that none of this makes any sense. And this is all padded in a way so that everything fits directly into the place where they want it to go. But it doesn't work. It is immediately noticeable, and the reason for that is because we have had many, many, many times in Star Trek where we're faced with a situation where things are about to go completely disastrous and everyone's about to die or people are about to be hurt or whatever it is, and then somebody steps in and they have that philosophical debate and then they walk that person back from the edge. And that's what this sequence should have been. And they did do that with Picard and Soji. However, the way that everything was edited out, it was weirdly done, and it was very, very, very noticeably set up in a way that Picard was able to deal with the Romulan fleet, have the Federation show up, and he was able to talk down Soji. All the while, the majority of our main characters and a very key piece of information about Sutra was not being done or said anything. Nobody was doing absolutely anything during this sequence, and it was so bizarre. The next thing is that 38 minutes and 24 seconds, that's when Picard beams down. So from 25 minutes and 9 seconds to 38 minutes and 24 seconds, Rios, Raffi, Elnor, Narek, and Dr. Soong are doing absolutely nothing. We only see them again when Picard beams down to the planet so that he could die in front of all of them. And that's it. And it is so bizarrely edited and so bizarrely done. And I think that, in my opinion, that this was something that really, really stood out to me as the main issue with this episode. And I like I talked about I talked about the campfire thing. This one to me really takes the cake on being the most frustratingly edited and written sequence because it's so obviously padded to try to get everything into the exact position that it needs to be for the finale. Okay, so I know I just kind of rambled on a little bit there about my frustrations. This episode kind of very much felt to me like the writers knew where they wanted the cast to be at the end of this episode, end of the season, the final sequence where all of our Season 2 cast members are sitting on the bridge and they engage and they go to work. It felt like they knew that's where they wanted everyone to end up. but they struggled with how to connect the dots on how to get everybody there. And because of that, there's a lot of situations in this episode in particular that were oddly stretched out and kind of shoved in to make sure everything was padded just perfectly so that everything fell into place at the end. And it was very strange. It was very noticeable for me. It frustrated me quite a bit. But with that being said, I didn't hate this episode. For me, it's kind of sitting at a 7, maybe even a 6.5. This ending does bring down my overall rating for the series. Overall, I could say that Star Trek Picard has the best first season of any Star Trek show to date, and that is quite the feat, I think. And I think it was still a solid season, and I'm going to talk more about the overall season arc once I do my full season review and complete watch through and all that stuff like that. But overall, this episode kind of brought the rating down a little bit, at least as of right now for me. I had a lot of frustrations with what was going on with this particular episode, and yeah, I mean, I know I rambled on quite a bit about it, but that's where my review stands right now. So wrapping up this season, we have a couple of serious, outstanding questions, and I know a lot of these could potentially be touched up on seasons 2 or potentially 3 or whatever it is, but the things that kind of stood out to me is, who set up the admonition? What was the deal with the Conclave of 8? Why did they let Commodore O, who was the head of Starfleet security and probably has all of the Federation secrets, leave with all those Romulans? And she's essentially a war criminal because, from what we understand, she was directly responsible for the massacre on Mars. What the heck happened with the A500s on Mars? What was going on with that? They mentioned at the end of this episode that the synth ban had been lifted, but did they go through a whole kind of, uncovering kind of, mystery thing where they understood that the A500s were hacked into by the Commodore and that's what led to them malfunctioning and it wasn't something flawed with synthetics or that they had become sentient or whatever it is that they talk about that? We don't know. They don't really get into it. And what happened with Narek and what happened with the XBs and what happened with the Borg Q? Why did 7 leave them? Why is 7 with Raffi all of a sudden? What are all these weird things that are kind of happening? There's a lot of outstanding issues that they just kind of left open for all of us to deal with, and I hope that we get some answers into season 2 and they don't just accidentally forget that they ever existed and we never get any resolution on them. Alright guys and gals, that does wrap up my video review. I know this was a long one. I know a lot of you are going to have some issues with what I said. And like I said for episode 8, let's please try to keep all of our comments and feedbacks constructive. Let's not get into huge fights and get nasty with each other. These are just my opinions. You are going to have your opinions, and let's go ahead and debate those opinions, but let's keep it positive and constructive. So go ahead and get your thoughts and feelings and ideas and stuff like that down below in the comments section, and we'll go ahead and get this whole conversation started. Live long and prosper, my Trekkies!